Good morning. I have a few minutes before I have to go to work, and so I want to talk a little bit about Holmes, Dungeons and Dragons, which I have admitted over the last 5 or 6 years that it is my favorite version of Dungeons and Dragons, and I've mapped out the reasons for that in past videos that unfortunately no longer exist, and I may talk more about that in this video or other videos. But the gist of this video. I currently only have 3 RPGs in the house in hardback. The game we're currently developing, Holmes, D&D Basic, and Sword and Wizardry White Box, right? Those are the only 3 actual hardcover or tangible books I have in the house. The rest are boxed up in storage. And that's because that's ultimately all I've been GMing. And then I have, of course, others on PDF that I've been GMing as well, right? So the PDFs are a different beast as far as being able to run something else outside of those. But those are the only 3 games that currently I even touch. Currently, Holmes is inaccessible behind some laundry that needs to be done here on the bookshelf. But what I want to talk about was again, I've talked before about the simple reason I love Holmes. One, it is simple. 2, all of the math is confined to your D20, and it uses, of course, the attack matrix. It is built for levels 1 through 3. All of the math supports adventures and parties of level 1 to 3. Your dragon is a remarkable enemy, so to speak, but again, a fairly good party of 3-level characters with a recruited army of, villagers could maybe roust the dragon. And to me, that is the epitome of perfection, right? Is that, if you had a party of 6 3-level characters, in Holmes, you could hopefully not take out the dragon, but again, there's also this idea that if you didn't have that, you would have to recruit localers with torches and pitchforks, and so I love the idea that all of that exists in this universe of entry level character 0, 1, right? The 0 to 3 as our maximum, right? And again, for me, that's the sweet spot for D&D. For me, is levels 1 through 5. The most I think we ever did as a kid with Moldvay. I think Ron got a dwarf to level 9, right? But that was so rare for us as kids because we didn't fudge death. We didn't fudge hit points. We didn't. Well, a lot of times we'd let them start with full hit points. But anyway, so this is the gist of why I love Holmes. Number one, it's very simple, it's very focused, and of course the math all resides literally inside that D20. There's no math beyond that, etc. And again, the list of monsters is fine. You can certainly invent your own monsters like you can in any of these games instantly. It's all very, very good. But the big piece of that book that hangs at the end is Caller Mapper, the idea of the party. Caller Mapper, which I've rarely used. As kids, we used it. Caller, at some point, we had to throw out because that player always felt kind of like they were the boss and they were dictating or deriving the choices of the party. And so Caller never survived very long when we used it, or at least the time we did use it. And it brings me around again to state how we used it and how it was ultimately I think, perceived by us at 10 years old, 9 years old, or whatever it was somebody, we would have been 9, 10 years old, messing around with Holmes and Moldvay, or pre-Moldvay. And therefore it seemed to restrict because the guy that was the caller seemed to think he was kind of the boss of the party. And that's what happens with 10-year-old kid, 9, whatever, right? We didn't know any different. And as an adult, I've run a couple of games using Caller Mapper that were phenomenal because we were adults and we stuck to the idea that the role play exists, the party discusses and role plays, and then just communicates directly, the caller communicates directly with me when it is time to declare the next action and what everybody's doing to keep it organized. And it seems like a meaningless step in reality at times, but could be a valuable tool with huge parties of players, right? I can see why Caller Mapper for the fraternity college, when you might have 10 guys on the floor come to pile into your room to do a dungeon crawl, right? And whoever the GM is, they've got to somehow organize 10 or 12, guys, right, in a dorm room or a junior high library or something, right? So anyway, so the gist what I was getting at was Mapper was definitely something we did uh, uh, until we stopped gaming in our 20s, right? There was somebody at the table always was mapping, and for a couple of reasons. One, I wouldn't allow them instant retreat out of a dungeon without mapping, so it became kind of their instant portal to return to the town, all right, or the guild. And we used the guild notebooks of characters they could pick, and they would go on adventures. And okay, so again, because I talk about my evolution from everything homebrew, everything played, with utter freedom and flexibility to tweak any way you want, and then of course apply that to the session rules so players understand how you've tweaked the game. And I only started in the last 5 or 6 years trying to play games raw, rules as written, and I've enjoyed immensely those experiences because they were finally the literal experience of the book. They may not be the literal experience of my peers, of course. They aren't the literal experience of every table, even if they all followed the rules raw, but they were a literal experience for me as a GM, and rarely as a player, because I have yet to have anyone really run straight raw games sessions. I think me may have had a handful. And again, it's not necessary, right? It's not necessary. You can cherry pick the rules you want, right? I mean, one of the big ones for me is gold and as experience points, or solely experience points for the slaying of creatures, because then that becomes the utter focus. But when you think about Dungeons and Dragons and what it was about people setting out to either discover a treasure or to defeat these local enemies that were a burden to the society. And if we remember that D&D was the origins of Dungeons & Dragons to some degree, is this concept of adventurers coming together to go rid the local crypt of a vampire, or search a tomb to discover treasure and face those consequences. And we're talking about just the D&D basic kind of idea of a dungeon crawl. Then that is what it is, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, yes, then you are literally going in there to eradicate the enemy. You're going in there as exterminators, right? Monster exterminators, so to speak. So I guess the gist of this video is, so my take on The Caller, right? Based on the, and again, I don't have the book available to me that I can pull out here. It's in a protective case and read you, quote unquote, Caller right now, since I'm on my way to work. But the question is, do you use it? And if you don't, why did you discontinue the use of it? And my argument is, and I know some people say because it eliminates players' opportunity to role play, but I actually think Caller heightens role play between the party and the players, and it turns the GM into an unreliable narrator, right? It turns the GM into a force that players can't readily manipulate or can't readily access to get answers, right? Jeff in the party can't do a Mother May I with his Caller, right? Jeff can only say what he's available to do. I want to use my 10-foot pole to prod the thing. And then the Caller turns to me and says, okay, on this turn, I'm holding the torch, Bill is watching down the hall, and Jeff's going to use his 10-foot pole to prod the package in the corner, as opposed to Bill looking at the GM and saying, can I prod the package in the corner? Out of turn, so to speak, right? So Caller also allows them to negotiate what they're doing in this 10 minutes, right? This turn, right? A turn is there's 6 turns in an hour or whatever, right? 10-minute turns. They all kind of decide what they're going to do in this 10-minute segment, whether they're moving down the dungeon or they're moving through the forest or they're on a ship on the ocean or whatever the case may be, and turn to the GM and explain that, and then the GM can direct or narrate the results of such things or demand a die roll from Jeff, etc., etc. So I actually think the Caller is the piece that's been lost, that actually impedes, I think, in many ways, the role-playing, in that we end up in a turn-based economy of going from person to person to person, or we end up in a out of order. One guy really wants to prod that package with this 10-foot pole, but yet we haven't got everybody's input. What are you guys doing on this turn? And because the GM's doing this, we're out of character all the time, because the GM's got to say, wait a second, Jeff, I know you want to prod the thing. What are you doing, Jill? Okay, what are you doing, Sam? Okay. And meanwhile, we're never really in party character. So anyway, that's my take, but I was curious how your experiences have gone. And I was curious what you think, and whether it is remotely interesting to utilize Caller and Mapper and Quartermaster, for instance. I think those things can be remarkable, and I think they can actually heighten party interaction, player role play. And then, of course, you role play with the GM when it's an NPC having a conversation with Jeff, etc., etc. So that's just my thought. Thanks. Bye.